listener production.
G'day, it's Rusty here at the start line of part 2 of my podcast with racer Jason Bright. If you haven't already, make sure you give part 1 a listen. We cover the early years, racing open wheelers with Mark Webber, how the daughter Supercars opened for him, driving with F1 hero Alan Jones, winning Bathurst and making it all the way to IndyCar. We begin this second instalment by talking about his return to Australia and how a plan B really shifted into gear during a Bathurst drive with another Rusty's Garage guest, Paul Radisich, with a team run by touring car legend Dick Johnson.
I didn't grow up a Dick Johnson fan. He was always the bad guy as far as I was concerned. But and even, when I was racing against him in 98 and 99, he was just a rival, in another car. But the experience of, driving for DJR and how good a guy, Dick Johnson was, that was pretty special. I learned more about Dick Johnson doing that one weekend and how down to earth he was and a good guy to be around than I did probably in the rest of my career, and so that made it pretty special. I had a lot more respect for Dick after that weekend, after growing up with him being my hero's sort of rival, than what I expected.
Both Greg Murphy and David Brabham have been on the podcast, so I've had a chance to ask both of them about the panels. I'm going to ask you now because you brought it up. You brought up Race of 1,000 Years. Murph talked about it being like driving an aircraft carrier, brute. So such a long bonnet. Lots of power, maybe a bit of a handful around Adelaide. What are your recollections of that car and getting the chance to drive it?
It was really weird to drive. I mean, awesome in the fact that it had great power. It had awesome stopping power as well because it had carbon discs. And it was, it was a proper LMP1 car. It was only the Audis that were any quicker than it. But it was very unique to drive. You were sitting essentially on the rear tyre, with engine and everything all forward of that. It was very, very weird to drive. And, Murph and I probably struggled to get anywhere near the most out of it compared to Brabham. Brabs had driven the car quite a bit, knew what to expect from it, knew how to drive a car when sitting on top of the rear tyre. And so it was definitely a very different beast to drive, but I'd say it's probably one of the, most unique LMP1 car or big sports cars, ever made. It was certainly a very unique car, and what the whole experience of driving for Don Panos that weekend was very unique. I mean, he's, what he sort of brought to motorsport. I remember sitting when we did the test at Sebring. We were sitting in a restaurant that he owned at the track, at the hotel that he owned. There were bottles of wine from the winery that he owned, at the racetrack that he owned, and we were driving for the race team that he owned. He was, and he invented the nicotine patch and he smoked like a chimney because it was
surreal.
He was just a crazy guy. We were waiting for him at dinner because the landing gear wouldn't go down on his private plane. It was just, very, crazy guy. Loved motorsport, did a lot for motorsport and sports car racing in America, buying, all of the circuits that he did, like Mosport and Road Atlanta and Sebring. And, so he was a very interesting guy and a pretty crazy experience driving for him.
In that whole period from Gold Coast Indy to Race of 1,000 Years, where were you at as far as the following year was concerned? Because clearly you wanted to keep going if you could in America, but that was an expensive proposition. You must have been going through the whole machinations of that, were you, and what was happening?
Yeah, so I had, there were options on the table in America and IndyCar, but, they were still millions of dollars, and we were millions of dollars short, basically. I think I was very fortunate to be in a situation where I think I signed my Holden Racing Team contract at Bathurst when I was with Dick Johnson.
What were you doing? Having meetings sort of out the back type thing, or what were you up to?
Well, it was at the time, Craig was obviously leaving Holden Racing Team, going to Double O, and they approached me to drive for HRT. The contract that I signed, there was a cut-off date of, I think it was February the 15th. If I didn't have an IndyCar drive by February the 15th, I had the Holden Racing Team drive. So I sort of had the best of both worlds. I extremely lucky to be in that situation where I could go hard and put everything into trying to find an IndyCar drive. But if I didn't, I was stepping into one of the, probably the best seat in, Supercars at the time.
When did you call on the IndyCar thing and commit to Supercars then?
It was pretty much February the 15th. I put everything into trying to come up with the money to go over there, but it was, very hard to find the corporate dollars you needed to go overseas and race. I was probably a couple of years early. A couple of years later, we had Team Australia and, KV Racing, who all had a bit of an Australian flavour to them. So I think it would have been probably a little bit easier if it was a couple of years later. But, my American racing that I did was amazing. I was lucky that I didn't, miss out on, a career in Australia because I had a crack at overseas. And that's always the risk when you do, go overseas and have a crack at something like IndyCar or F1 and, that you get forgotten about here in Australia and end up with, no drive here. So I was pretty lucky that I ended up with, I felt like the best of both worlds in that regard.
Most people, when they've come on and spoken about a certain point in their career, talk about rolling the dice in some way. For Mark Webber, that year in 2002, getting those valuable championship points for Minardi helped set him on the way as far as Formula One was concerned. For you to come back from America when you backed yourself, Jace, and maybe it's not something you need to discuss in a numbers sense, but was it a heavy burden financially when you came back from there to sort of embark on the Holden Racing Team chapter? Were you great to drive for the premier team, but were you coming back weighed down by that whole US experience?
Not really, no. I mean, if there was one motto I always sort of lived by in my motorsport was have a crack and go as far as you can. And if you don't make it to F1 or IndyCar, then you'll have no regrets. If I had just stayed here racing supercars, I would have had regrets. And that's what I didn't want to be. I didn't want to think, I should have had more of a crack at overseas. But I knew that I'd given, getting to IndyCar or F1, everything that I could, with what I had. I got to race in IndyCar. I got to race, great sports cars and Indy Lights cars. And I still, I guess, through the rest of my supercar career, I always sort of kept my ear to the ground and, wanted to do events like Le Mans and wanted to do, other events. So, I didn't miss out on any of those opportunities. And, but if I had have just done supercars, a lot of those opportunities wouldn't have happened, I don't believe.
So you come back and you get to race for the iconic team in HRT, and they're in an unbelievable phase of success as an organisation. You're a part of that, and your teammate to Mark Scaife, who's an ultra competitive human being. What was that whole dynamic like? That whole period like? To be a part of that.
It was interesting. I remember my first day getting to HRT, and Matty Crawford, who was my engineer, walked me through the workshop, and he said, welcome to the most hated team in supercars. And I'm like, what do you mean most hated? And he's like everyone, you either love Holden Racing Team, which they did have a massive amount of fans, but everyone else hated him. And that's pretty much the story for any successful team in sport. But it was a good way to put it. And but it was a crazy good period. We obviously won a lot of races. The Walkinshaw group back then and the Kmart race team. There was a period there where we were sort of dominating the first couple of rows of the grid, and that was really good to be a part of. Then moving across to Team Brock as part of the same sort of group as well, that was probably more enjoyable for me. I think at HRT it was Mark certainly had the team working in his favour. I felt, and I had some good times there, but I felt like it was better moving across to Team Brock and being a bit more in control and working with Phil Keed, who I built a good relationship with, and I felt like we kicked well above our weight, punched well above our weight in that period than just winning races at HRT. I felt like we were doing a good job for a small team, and we had a lot of good equipment, but I don't feel like it was the best equipment at that time. But it was. I felt like we were getting more out of it than what I was at HRT at the time.
I'm really glad that you bring up Phil Keed, because that was sort of the natural line of questioning, because he'd been over with ProDrive in the World Rally Championship, hadn't he? And that was the first time you guys, they took a punt, brought him over, and the first time that you guys got to work together, and you would do that several times throughout your career. That bond between driver and engineer became actually a really significant thing for you, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And, it was like, I guess that 2003 year was great because, Phil had only done rallying up to that point. He was trying to learn, about supercars. He was going to all of the tracks for the first time. And, we started doing track walks in 2003. I think we were probably one of the first teams to ever do it because Phil had never been to the circuits before. And so he sort of used me as a bit of a source of information on all the circuits, and but I think what that did was we actually learnt a lot about each other and how we work well together, and so I've like I said, I felt like that 2003-4 period we were getting the most out of those cars that we could.
Credit to you. I mean, these are from friends and rivals. Paul Wheel, who you were teammate with, he said you always loved the data and that you had a great understanding of that. Even Greg Murphy says that you thrived on the technical side, and he saw that in various different examples, from 24-hour to Panos to you name it, within that group that you're talking about. At what point did you realise that was a skill, or had that skill morphed from what you were talking about before, the learnings of Formula Ford and so on?
I think there was a mixture of things. I think, preparing my own car, I always, had an interest in it from that point, so the Formula Ford days. But I felt like I learnt so much in America working with a good engineer. My engineer over there, Gerald Tyler, was, extremely good engineer. And I learned a lot about, setting up the car. Racing on ovals setups are very important. And it always got me thinking outside the box. The data, I learned a lot about the data working with him. And there was a lot more data on those cars than what we had in supercars back then. So, I've always had a very keen interest in the technical side, and I work very hard at finding sponsorship. I work very hard at making the car go as quick as it can. So, and I enjoyed all different aspects of it. So, I don't know how much other drivers put into it, but I certainly have always enjoyed, the technical side of it and trying to get the most out of the car.
I'm never one to look back and have regret, because you make the best decisions with the info in front of you at the time. I'm a firm believer in that. You could argue that 05, within the mix of what we've just been talking about, could have been a super year for you, but you embark on yet another challenge for Jason Bright, and the whole notion of running your own team. When did the idea of starting Brytech or venturing down that path really begin for you?
It was probably 2003, 4. You know, it was, I guess, I've always had aspirations to own my own team. You know, I guess, you know, I liked guys like Cito and that, you know, had their own team and drove their own cars. And, you know, 2004, we're obviously having a good year. You know, if there was ever going to be an opportunity to find the sponsorship and the backing to do it, you know, it was going to be after that. And, you know, I initially had the support from Holden. I only wanted a one-car team, to be honest. You know, I would have been in either a Walkinshaw car or a Paul Morris car. And so the transition would have been, you know, relatively easy. You know, essentially almost taking a car very similar to the one that I was competitive with and, you know, just running it out of a small workshop. And, you know, that all sort of changed. I had a phone call from managing director of Caterpillar, actually, who is a friend of mine. I sat next to him on the plane going to Canberra the year before and you know, or actually it was a couple of years before, and it was before Lowndes was going to ProDrive. I actually tried to talk him into sponsoring my car at Team Brock, and he was sort of, you know, lured to ProDrive with Lowndes driving the car at with Ford backing, and, you know, thought it was going to be great, and anyway, that obviously didn't pan out so well for them, and he phoned me up at the end of 2004 and said, I want you to drive the Caterpillar car at ProDrive. And I'm like, I'm already doing my own thing, and wasn't even going to meet with them. And in the end, I went and had a meeting with them, and, you know, the opportunity with Ford, you know, was made to sound extremely compelling. And, you know, they wanted two cars. They wanted another, you know, manufacturing house, you know, to do engines and chassis. And so, you know, part of the proviso for me to, you know, to get all of the backing for a 5-year deal with Ford was that I did 2 years with ProDrive. And as part of that deal, I made sure that I went there with an engineer, you know, obviously Phil Keed. And I went there for the 2 years, did what I, you know, had to do, and you know, then moved to my own team, you know. But it was, yeah, it was a tough couple of years because, you know, there was a couple of things. One, you know, my team was sitting over there and it had its hands tied because it was attached to me, and so they weren't allowed to test. You know, I had 2 rookie drivers, Matt White and Steve Owen, and the year after Warren Luff, and they weren't even allowed to do a test day. And it's just ridiculous rules like that, you know, I don't feel like there would have been anything in it. It was just, you know, hurting young guys' careers that, you know, really didn't need to be that way. And all, you know, it was just the wrong people making the wrong decisions, I felt. But, you know, so it was disappointing to see that was happening. You know, and it was also disappointing to leave ProDrive at the time. You know, I had a great year in 2006. There were good people back then. You know, Dave Richards was a great guy. And I really felt like if I stayed at ProDrive in 2007, we would have had a very good shot at the title, in the same way that I would have had a good shot at the title if I stayed at PWR in 2005. But if I didn't move to my own team at the time, it would have been, you know, too late. You know, if I sort of stayed at ProDrive for a couple more years.
It's a huge undertaking, mate, because I can recall working on the Australian Rally Championship at the time. You had cars in there for Michael Guest and Darren Windus. I mean, it was bigger than just a supercar operation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was extremely proud of the workshop we had, you know, and proud of the guys. You know, to be honest, I felt like we were really only making headway in supercars right when the money started to dry up because of GFC. You know, our first, you know, in-house engine was, you know, basically built at the end of 2007 when, Ford pulled all their funding. So it was, it was disappointing in that regard because I felt like, we were just making good headway and it sort of all started to go backwards. But, it was, as far as, what we achieved, the rally cars were awesome cars. We had an immaculate workshop, 2,000 square metres. We had our own dyno, spray booth, sub-assembly, CNC machine shop, fabrication area. I was very proud of what we had. It was, just a shame that, we had very good backing. We had, Fujitsu, we had Ford, we had Caterpillar, Irwin Tools. All the ingredients were there. But just as we started to make, I felt the right ground. It was, the money started to get very tight.
How'd you go dealing with that? How hard was that to deal with?
Extremely hard. The last thing I wanted to do was shut the doors on Britec when so much effort had gone into it, and, I'd made hard decisions to leave PWR, hard decisions to leave ProDrive, as a paid driver to watch it all build up and be very proud of it. And then, the financial reality of it was that, the sponsorship wasn't there to run it the way that we needed to, and, I think part of the problem was, the money we were getting from a manufacturer to set up a 2-car operation, and the fact that they wanted all of their own, another manufacturing house, that wasn't feasible. If we were just like Paul Cruikshank was at the time, where we were just getting a car from 888, preparing it, and not having to worry about all of the design and manufacture, I think we would have been able to possibly weather it a bit better.
One thing I wanted to quickly chat about before we move on in career terms here involves Le Mans and 2006, because there was an opportunity there with Aston Martin and ProDrive, wasn't there, that you were scheduled to do that? Yeah,
so I did Sebring with Pedro Lamy and Stefan Sarrazin, and it all came from George Howard Chappell, who was with ProDrive. Dave Richards sent him out to Australia to help the supercar team. And at Tasmania, when he was out there, he asked me whether I'd be interested in having a test in the Aston Martin, and I went over and had a test at Vallelunga, and it went really well. And they basically signed me up to do Sebring, Le Mans 24 hours, and then Petite Le Mans at Road Atlanta in 2006. But there was a cancellation of one of our races in China, and they moved the date 1 week to have a Winton round, and it clashed with the test at Le Mans, so I couldn't do Le Mans. I sat at home watching Pedro and Stefan and my replacement lead the whole race at Le Mans, and unfortunately they blew a clutch on the last pit stop. But I was thinking, man, this could have been my chance to win Le Mans. But it was a bit of a shame that the Aston Martin was awesome to drive. We had a good run at Sebring, but we weren't on the Michelin, whereas they switched to the Michelin at Le Mans and were much more competitive. But we still had a podium at Sebring. But yeah, it was very enjoyable to go and do that race with ProDrive. They were very professional outfit with the Aston Martin.
It's an amazing place, Le Mans, and anyone listening really must go and experience it. It's such an incredible event. You would get back there in 2013, but I want to tap into your recollections, if I can, of Alan Simonson, a guy who was known and loved in this part of the world, had raced at Bathurst in both the 12-hour and even the 1,000, and that was a very difficult year with his passing, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was. I mean, it was difficult for a couple of reasons. I mean, I didn't have a lot to do with Alan in Australia, but I did do Bathurst with him once at the 12-hour in the Mustang with Marcus Zekanovic. So got to know him there, and we got on really well. He also came out and did the Gold Coast race with Jason Bargwanna that year. And so I got to know him reasonably well in the end. But it was at the start of the race at Le Mans. I was in the car actually, and I saw, Alan had crashed, and I drove past, and I didn't sort of like what I saw, and when I got out of the car, because I actually got out of the car not long after, and asked my dad, how's Alan? And he's like, no, they've said he's okay, and so for that next period, I was under the impression that he was, still okay, and then I got back in the car an hour or so later, and I was in the car for a few hours, and when I got out, my dad told me that Alan had passed away, and that was really tough because he had a son or a child the same age as my son, who was over there at Le Mans with me, and so going back and sleeping in the motorhome that night was really difficult. And then it certainly it was a tough race in that regard. It was not very often. I can't think of any races that I've been in when someone's passed away, and you're in the other side of the world, and when someone of your friends passed away like that, it made it pretty difficult. That's for sure.
People say things go together like peanut butter and jam, or a pie and sauce, but what about front-wheel drive cars and a handbrake? Now that's a perfect match.
Your chapter with Brad Jones Racing is one of longevity, mate. It was a great period for you. Why was it such a good fit? And obviously it was a change of regulations for the category at the time with a new car coming on while you were there, and you guys seemed to adapt to it pretty well straight away, didn't you? Yeah,
it was a great period. I remember I went to the BJR Christmas party the year that I'd sort of signed with them before I was driving there, and I think I ran into JR in the car park, and he was like, "Mate, you'll never want to leave this place. Trust me, you'll see out your career here." And that's, it was that kind of way. Like, you once you were there, you're sort of not looking around for other places to go, and I felt like I found a really good family there. So, and it was I sort of take my hat off to Brad because, it was Phillip Island 2009. I think it was after I got pole in the Stone Brothers Fujitsu car that I was racing that year, and Brad came over and said, "Mate, if you ever want to, just drive again, get rid of all the team owner stuff and just drive again, give me a call." And so that was what I did, and that's how it all sort of came about. That next year, and once again, I teamed up with Phil again. Phil was, I don't think, having a lot of fun at Pro Drive at the time, and we got talking, and I'm like, well, looks like I might be going to Brad's, and do you want me to get him to call you? And that was pretty much how that happened. And so it was good to team up with Phil again. It was good, I think that year we got provisional pole at Bathurst in 2010. We were lucky to get BJR's first couple of wins, the year after, and that was really satisfying. It was satisfying, because I did it with Phil both times. At Pro Drive, getting their sort of wins, in 2006, and then at BJR, that was really satisfying to see a team that had been there so long, and how happy it made the whole team to get those wins, at a pretty tough time when JR was so sick.
You brought up JR, Jason Richards. He was a much-loved member of that team, that family, as you described them before, and of the sport for that matter. You would win the race, the trophy bearing his name after he passed in New Zealand, and I think you famously jumped up on the podium and smashed the light above you, and so on. Just share with our audience a bit. He's much missed, isn't he?
Absolutely. I think everyone knows how good a guy he was. Like, that's that's well documented. I think, from, racing against him, you knew he was a racer, he was a hard racer, and we had some great battles. But when I was in the same team as him, I saw it even, better side of JR, where, he was a hard worker. Him and Wally used to, work so hard on that car, and, he was, he was just a pleasure to be around all the time. Not an angry bone in his body. He was, I as far as teammates go, he was certainly, one of my favourite teammates that I ever had. To be as far, and I mean that as far as, he'd race you hard, but there'd be no grudges. There was no hiding anything. There was no underhandedness. He was just super genuine, and for him, even when he got so sick, he would phone me a couple of times a week and just want to know what's going on with the car, and, how we're going to fix this relationship with you and Phil, because, we were having some problems and disagreeing on things, and he just would not, let up on it. He had to be always on the phone, chatting to you when he was driving or whatever. Yeah, he just, and he loved racing. Like that was, I don't meet too many people that are that passionate about their motorsport, and they just live for going racing like he did.
Yeah, amazing guy. Your full-time Supercars career would stop at, I think it was November 2017, wasn't it, at the Newcastle event there. Was that a hard thing to come to terms with? We've had a few years now to, I guess, get used to that. Was it hard to deal with, and how have you compartmentalised it?
At the time, it was extremely hard. Like, it was very emotional, and, I felt at the time that I needed to still sort of be involved some way. But, I think it was probably halfway through that year, I just enjoyed, sitting back and watching the races again. I think initially I was trying to figure out, right, how am I going to, still be involved and, be involved with the team, or, use my franchise and be involved there. And, but, once I'd sort of been out of it for a couple of races, I didn't miss it as much as anywhere near as much as what I expected to. It was, I felt, there was parts of the sport that I, really loved, and that was the technical side and the racing side. But, the travel and there's other parts of it that you do get over, and, you don't realise how big an impact they have on everything else you're trying to do in your life. But, certainly the racing side of it and the technical side of it, that was the part that I was going to miss the most, I felt.
Let's talk about life now. Task Force. Tell us about that, where you came up with the idea, and just share a bit more about what life is like in that world for you now.
Well, it's funny because the idea came from trying to find sponsorship back in the day. So it was an idea I had, I think it was 1999 when I first came up with it. And it was trying to find groups that have a lot of buying power and, a lot of pull, which then can generate into sponsorship. And, it sort of came from racing against, a lot of kids that had dads that owned trucking companies, and they just so happened to be sponsored by oil companies. And, and I saw an opportunity with, and I sort of always thought about it, with tradies, helping tradies, by grouping them together and putting together a buying group and generating work for them. But tradies, not a lot of them operate under the same brand. They're not like a big brand. They're all individual businesses, but so they all walk into their suppliers, and they all pay top dollar. So we help them, get some of that buying power. We generate work for them. We've got our own software now that, manufacturers like tap manufacturers and ceiling fan manufacturers use our software to manage their whole warranty process, and all of our tradies do that work. We do insurance work, but it's one of those things where we've now got a group of tradies nationally, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, handymen, painters that can do work for national groups, whether it be real estate companies, whether it be insurance companies, warranty work for manufacturers of air conditioners and lights and taps. So some of those things have only come about as a byproduct of what we were doing initially, which is being a bit of a buying group for tradies.
How much has the University of Motor Racing helped all this?
I think it still helps a lot. I enjoy, to be honest, the technical side of it, which is the software and the development of that, and I enjoy the marketing side of it as well. So, and I think the hard work of motorsport and the hours that you put in sometimes has helped it as well, and probably my pig-headedness, to keep on pushing on with it. But I enjoy going to the office every day and working with our small team and seeing things develop all the time.
And there is a bit of motor racing, which I love. So you and I have kind of reconnected, if you will, through the TCR series. So a global formula, for those that don't know about it, front-wheel drive, turbocharged cars, and they're the same here as they are in Asia or Europe. You ran in 2019 a VW Golf. We saw you back on the podium and all sorts. How satisfying was that, and how different are they to race compared to a supercar?
It was good. I mean, I like the formula. I like, there's certainly a lot of good aspects about it. I feel like, they've got the formula right in the sense that all the cars are very even, but got strengths in different areas.
Yeah, cost effective. Yeah.
And, there's no massive benefit in spending a heap of money to make a car that is so much faster than everyone else's because of the balance of performance. And I feel like they've got other parts of the formula right where, they punch a very big hole in the air, so slipstreaming's good. The racing's good because, all the cars make performance in different areas, and they're quite quirky to drive. The first couple of laps of a TCR race, it's on for young and old, and there's mistakes being made, and maybe it's certainly in this initial phase when everyone's getting used to it, but it's good racing, and the cars, are quite, are very good to drive in the sense that they've got good downforce, they're on a good tyre, and that makes the racing good. I feel like, the fact that you can have a, really good crack and fire it in under brakes, and they're a good little racing car. I feel like there's a lot of aspects to them that make for good racing.
How beneficial has that been for you, though?
I enjoy racing. I've enjoyed being out there last year and running in the task force colours as well. So, like I said, I think the category's got a good future here in Australia, and I take my hat off to the promoters because they've done all the right things. They've made sure the first year got up and running. There was a lot of naysayers, and they made sure it happened. They made sure it had good events. This year, even though there's been all the trouble with the COVID-19, going into the year they had the event at the Grand Prix. They had they've got a race at Bathurst. They've got a Channel 7 deal, free to air. So I feel like they've done all the right things to make the category a success, for sure.
A couple of final ones to finish here to give fans a bit of a sense of just how much you love cars and so on. Firstly, the race car that you go to sleep and dream of, because you've driven some amazing ones during your career, from the Champ car that you recounted on the Gold Coast to driving for HRT. Is there one that, you know, at a certain place when you're at the peak of your powers just gives you that really, really fond memory?
I think, you know, the Gold Coast Indy car, that was an insane car to drive, you know, and like I said, it was a peak of IndyCars period. They were the best cars. It was a Reynard. It was, you know, a 900 horsepower Toyota. It's pretty hard to beat that one as far as exhilarating. The Indy Lights car was probably something you really had to grab by the scruff of the neck, but it was an awesome car to drive. Yeah, it's hard to choose. I loved driving the Aston Martin GT1 car that it was back then. My favourite supercar sort of era was probably the PWR Commodore, or the Cat Falcon. Those two were probably, you know, where I felt we were getting the most out of the car and in a, you know, good phase.
One that's a little off topic in some respects, but I know as you've gone through business and things like that, invariably you probably enjoy good discussions with people that have either mentored or been successful and so on. If you could go for a drive anywhere in any car of your choice and pick some people to go for the ride with you for chat's sake, they can be racing, non-racing people. Who would it be? Where would you drive? What would the car be?
That's a hard one. I mean, I enjoy doing roads like Great Ocean Road or something like that. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting, you know, Jack Brabham a few times, you know, and I've, you know, watching some of those old videos and what they used to do then, and, you know, watching, you know, the Bruce McLaren documentary and that era, I'd love to, you know, hear a lot more about what they were doing then. So someone like Bruce McLaren or Jack Brabham, you know, and, you know, driving a car from their era, I think would be, you know, a very interesting, you know, conversation, put it that way.
For sure, there'd be some great old stories. You're very fortunate, Jace. I know you feel that way. You've driven for factory teams, great people, Brad and Kim Jones, Ross and Jimmy Stone, heroes like Brocky, Johnson. It's been a remarkable career, really, when you think about it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate, like, you know, and I think, as I said before, you know, I always lived by the, you know, I'm going to have a crack at trying to make it. And, you know, even when I was doing go-karts, you know, that was, if I got to race a Formula Ford once or twice and that was where my career finished, then so be it. I had a crack and I got to race a Formula Ford. But, you know, to have sort of gone on and, you know, got to race an IndyCar, you know, got to race at Le Mans, Sebring, Supercars for 20 years or so, you know, win a couple of Australian championships. I feel very lucky. But to do it and, you know, do it, I guess, with a lot of the guys that I looked up to, like Brock Johnson, you know, Alan Jones, you know, Stone Brothers, you know, I feel like I'm really lucky, you know, to have actually sort of been able to do it with them as well.
Congratulations, mate. It's been great to summarise all that in some way. Lots of people have been asking for you to come on and knowing the things that you've gone off and done during your career. I mean, to throw into what you were just talking about a moment ago, a Bathurst victory, you know, more than 570 races that you contested, 20 wins and a swag of podiums. It's been quite a ride and it's been great to relive it with you now, mate. Well done.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Rusty's Garage is written and presented by me, Greg Rust. Series producer and editor is Alex Mitchell. Audio production by Darcy Thompson. I'm Greg Rust. Enjoy the drive, but drive safely.
Listener.